The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Do we have to lose touch with our loved ones when they die? Is there really evidence that souls who have crossed over communicate with this world on a regular basis? Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. Our guest today, Bill Guggenheim, is a pioneer in the field of after-death communication, ADC experiences. He has been called the father of ADC research and has written and spoken on the subject for more than 27 years. He became a bereaved father when his younger daughter, Janet, age 47, ended her physical life in April of 2011. Bill and his former wife, Judy Guggenheim, founded, defined, researched, and named an entirely new field of human experience that may be as old as mankind. They call it after-death communication and published their findings in their best-selling book, Hello from Heaven. Bill and Judy conservatively estimate that at least 60 million Americans, 1 out of 5 people, have had an ADC, though the actual numbers may be closer to double these figures. Bill presents ADC workshops at conferences, local chapters of bereavement support groups, hospices, churches, colleges, bookstores, and many other types of institutions, and will be doing an abridged workshop at the upcoming IANS conference in Orlando in July. His ADC research and his book, Hello from Heaven, have been featured on television, including 2020 on ABC, and radio, including Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie, twice, and in numerous newspapers and magazines throughout the United States and Canada. Hello from Heaven has been published in 18 foreign editions and continues to attract readers around the world. Bill, welcome to NDE Radio.
Pleasure to be here with you, Lee.
It's good to have you, Bill. Bill, the story of how you and Judy got interested in the study of after-death communications is really fascinating. It involves Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and Raymond Moody, and all of that's in your book. But sadly, since we're limited to only a half hour, I'm hoping we can jump to how you define after-death communications and then tell us about the different ways messages can come through from the other side.
Well, our definition is very specific, purposely. An after-death communication, or ADC, is a spiritual experience that occurs when a person is contacted directly and spontaneously by a family member or a friend who has died. An ADC is a direct experience because no third parties, such as psychics, mediums, therapists, rituals, or devices, are involved. Mm-hmm. And an ADC is a spontaneous event because our deceased loved ones always choose when, where, and how they will contact us. So but directly, there's no third party involved. They come to us.
Which eliminates a lot of fraudulent practices. If for people are aware of that, then they probably would try to avoid psychics and mediums and the like.
Yeah, there's a great deal of opinions about that whole field, and fortunately it's outside of our research, so I don't have to comment on it.
Okay. Well, tell us about the different forms of communication that you've delineated.
Well, there are 12, ironically, just 12 major ones, and I don't have time to describe them all, but the most common one, frankly, is feeling the presence, feeling that the person is near you. Then from there you go to hearing a voice, smelling a fragrance, feeling a touch, or actually seeing them with your eyes. And then there are some other categories, such as when you're asleep. And then people write a great deal about symbolic ADCs, where they receive a sign from their deceased loved one. The most common ones involve rainbows or butterflies, but there are many, infinitely number of other signs, such as a bird or other animal and its behavior coming to you and acting in a very unusual way that you just know this is a message from someone you love who has died.
As a chaplain, I've encountered many people who've told me practically all the different delineations you have mentioned I've been told anecdotally stories about things that they've experienced. And actually myself, I encountered the spirit of my mother with a very strong smell of roses in the middle of winter when there were no roses around. And my father as well at a different time when I smelled his cologne just permeating the room, and there was, of course, no one else was there.
Interestingly, of all the 12 types, smelling a fragrance is the one that's most commonly shared with two or more people at the same place, same time. And one person smells it, and then another comes along and sniffs the air, and it says, where are the lovely roses or lilacs or whatever it may be, or cologne or perfume, something. And another person, on and on. So we do have 6 chapters in Hello from Heaven of why are these real and not merely grief-induced hallucinations. And this is one of the, fits into one category of shared ADCs.
How is it difficult for people to delineate or to differentiate between hearing a voice in their head and hearing a voice through their ears?
Basically, some people say they hear with their ears, but frankly, I believe they all hear it inside their head by telepathy, in other words. And they're just so used to saying that's what they believe, because that's the only thing they've ever experienced. Telepathy is something very new and different, and it's only a small category that can claim they heard with their physical ears.
Right. Although people who have had near-death experiences often say that there's no conversation; it's all telepathic.
Yes, it's very much alike that way.
It takes that kind of communication that takes place from the other side.
Yes, and you can have two-way conversations, and some people do, and whole books have been written this way. One of the better-known ones right now is The Afterlife of Billy Fingers, which is a best-selling book by Annie Kagan, best-selling book at Amazon.com. And it's been out for 3 years and it's still doing very, very well. It was dictated to her in large part by her deceased brother.
Oh.
That's just as one book. There are others.
Yes. Feeling a touch. Now, I had that happen to me once. Was a friend of mine who died in the hospital. I just happened to be sitting in the cafeteria at the time, felt a hand on my shoulder, and turned. There was no one anywhere near me, but I knew immediately that it was this person, and later found out that was the moment that she had died in the hospital. I didn't even realize she was in the hospital at the time.
Yes, there are many experiences that occur where we have the experience first, then we learn of their death afterwards. And we may not learn about it until the next morning by telephone or email or something of that nature, but we have the experience first. And I claim people are not bereaved, assuming it's a sudden death, not a long and lingering illness. They're not bereaved in the case of a sudden death like a car accident or a plane crash or something until they receive the physical news and whatnot. But when they have someone visit them first and say, I love you, thank you very much for being my friend or whatever, and goodbye, then they hear about it later that this really did occur, the person did die, then that's their validation.
Now, how would you differentiate between someone passing through and saying goodbye from people's experiences of ghosts, for instance? What's the difference there?
That's another thing. I'm fortunate, and we didn't get into ghosts whatsoever because we said it had to be a relative or a friend, someone you knew. Occasionally it is a relative who you didn't know, like such as your husband's mother or father, but it's a relative. Whereas a ghost is usually not identified, and we didn't include ghosts in our work, nor did we include mediums and mediumship and psychics and all that, because we wanted it to be totally different and new, because this is a new field, and so we set our own boundaries.
I've talked to people, though, who've said, my grandmother came to visit me, and it was sometime after the death. Why would that not be a ghost?
Well, as soon as there's a big thing about NDEs, which I've been involved with since 1975, and we began our research for this in 1988, so 11-year difference there. and that is when you say ghosts and you use parapsychology and paranormal and all these other words, you're using old language that as soon as they're used, people dismiss it and they don't believe, they stop listening. And that's why we don't use those. Nobody said I was contacted by the ghost of my mother. Not one person of the 2,063 or whatever that we interviewed said that. Nobody uses that kind of language. Nobody says, I had a metaphysical experience with my grandmother, or I had a paranormal experience with my son. They just say, my son came to me. This is the way people talk. It's that there's a big difference between science and psychology, and on the one hand, and this is regarded as something other than and less than real. That's unfortunate about all these words like ghost and paranormal and parapsychology and whatnot. And if these NDE researchers would stop using that language, their books and whatnot would be more creditable, I believe.
And yet there seems to be lots of evidence, although, maybe it's a different field of study, but there seems to be lots of evidence that there are spirits that seem to have attached themselves to this world and don't move on into the light, and they get called ghosts. I
know. I'm very aware of that. And you see these shows, I call it the flashlight under the chin. And they're on TV, and they go down to a basement in which there's no light, and they're walking around whispering to each other with some big box they're holding in their hand. And they say, here, look, the needle's moving this way, and the antenna's moving that way. And they make it all very, very spooky and eerie, and the audience loves it because they like being scared. But These aren't scary. These are uplifting. These are cheerful. These are happy. These are modern-day evidence for life after death. It's all how you want to look at it.
Right. One of the people I've had on this program teaches a course in how to have an out-of-body experience. And one of the things that this group does is call it missionary work to spirits who are stuck in this plane. They'll go into a bar, for instance, and find a ghost that was an alcoholic in life and is standing next to a living patron. And as the patron raises a glass to his mouth, the ghost imitates the motion, trying to recapture the essence of what it was to be an alcoholic on earth. And so they go and tell him, hey, you don't belong here. This isn't where you're supposed to be anymore.
Paul Elder wrote a book on that, Eyes of an Angel, and he, I think, was a graduate of the Monroe Institute, and some of those people do that rescue work. Rosie McKnight used to be there, and she did it. And I've met probably William Buhlman, who's the expert today on OBEs, has probably done some of that. But that's different than our field. That's all I'm saying. That's purposeful contact to rescue people, save people from being stuck in eternity and endless loop tapes, things of that nature. I know about it, but that's not my field.
Right. Now, one of the categories I think you mentioned is people who have visions of a loved one. Do you see that as a projection from the other side? Maybe you could give us an example of that. Okay,
well, there are two different categories. One is visual, and literally seeing the deceased loved one, everything from a faint outline on up to as solid to each other as you are, and I would be if we were in the same room together. That's visual, where you may just see their head and shoulders, or from the waist up, from the knees up, anything less than seeing the entire physical body we call partial visual, and if they're less than solid, but if they're fully solid and fully visible, then that's a visual. And those are very cheerful, very uplifting, because regardless of the form of death, and keep in mind automobile accidents, battlefield casualties, things like that, you don't want to see. But when they come back, they're healed and whole and in radiant health, usually beaming and smiling at the person with or without communication. And they're letting us know that they're fine and everything's okay. Their physical body is wherever, but they are not that. They're in their spiritual body. Now, seeing an ADC vision is looking through. It's very hard. There are different categories, but one is just seeing a vision in the room which I've seen myself, just suspended in space, but other kinds are where you see through this dimension to seeing them in their reality, their dimension. And that's what I did with my daughter, Janet.
Oh. Could you tell us a little about that?
Yes, my daughter took her life at age 47. I woke up, she had attempted suicide a couple of times before. She was very brilliant, very sensitive, very this, very that, but she had gone off cold turkey all of her medications. And I'm sure that she just went into a black hole, a downward spiral into a darker and darker and darker place, and she just couldn't stand it anymore of depression. And for some reason didn't immediately go back on her meds. But that's what happened, and very impulsively she ended her life then. But a number of months later, over a year later, I was on my desktop, I have the song Here Comes the Sun, which I identify with her. When she was alive, whenever I heard the song by the Beatles, I would send her Sunshine. It's
a wonderful song.
Picking her up, sending her love.
Yes.
Daddy sending his daughter love. Nothing unusual with that. Only this time I heard this song, and I remembered that her mother built a beautiful website for Janet, in which, much to my surprise and delight, there were many people who had written in saying how much Janet had helped them in their life through all kinds of situations. So here was seemingly a young woman who had been troubled herself, reaching out so many times in so many ways and helping others. And I didn't know that about her. It's amazing what parents don't know. Mothers, fathers, even if the children live nearby and you spend a great deal of time with them, and you still don't know these other sides of them. And that's what I saw and I got from this experience. But more importantly, I saw Janet. She was turning and also dancing around in a circle. So she was twirling while dancing in a circle, smiling, saying, "Look, Dad, I'm fine. I'm whole. I'm healed. Everything's okay." And I learned that she's working with children with art. That was her thing, art and drawing and painting and everything to do with that, and writing books. And she was working on producing huge, you do it mentally, you produce these huge, like sculptures, in her case, with children, and with their minds. And it's like huge kites that were flying in the air, without an atmosphere in this case, but they're moving in the air.
Yes.
And she was just delighted and happy in letting me know this. And I felt so wonderful for her and her mother and everybody else who is so bereaved by Janet's transition.
Of course, that'd be a wonderful message to get.
Yeah.
You guys did more than 3,300 firsthand accounts and interviews with people who've had various experiences. Have you ever had one where the person who came back said they weren't happy where they were?
We had some who came back to apologize, such as for abusing somebody while they were alive. Mm-hmm. Yes. But they were always with somebody, interestingly, an angel or Jesus or Mary or somebody. They couldn't come on their own. So if it had been an uncle who abused a niece, that kind of thing, there was a third party that they came with and received permission to come back and to apologize and hopefully be forgiven by the living person, in which case they were. Yes, the one that comes to mind the best, it's almost comedic in its own way. A brother took his own life, and his sister was very concerned about him, and she had an experience in which she saw him, not sure while she was asleep or in a vision. It really doesn't matter. But she saw her brother wearing an old T-shirt and shorts, and he was in his 20s or upper 20s or so, lower 30s, pacing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and just like almost like wringing his hands with despair. And she called out, "What is it? What's happening?" And used his name. Let's say Jeffrey. Jeffrey, what's wrong? What are you upset about? And he stopped and turned and looked at her straight on and said, "I've been sentenced." And she went, "Oh, this was a suicide, by the way." Which is a no-no according to a lot of churches and all that. "Sentenced?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "I've been sentenced to eternal life." Now, the one thing you don't want when you take your life is eternal life. You're trying to obliterate yourself.
Right.
Trying to end your pain. That's all you're focused on is your pain. And you want to, under most circumstances, there are other things when spies take their life or somebody like that, but the ordinary person, and here he is, has this eternal life, but is so confused that this is not what he wants.
So it was eternal life without eternal light.
Yeah.
In other words, he wasn't benefiting from God's love.
Exactly, yes.
Wow. Well, I guess that would be a form of hell.
Yes.
Now there is
a lot of people, we speak about life and after death and hell. There's so many hells on earth. Every battlefield is a hell. Places where people are tortured, places where people don't have food and water, and they're watching their children starve to death because of man's inhumanity to man by not sharing the resources on this planet. On and on and on and on. You can come up with 20 of your own. But this life is very much a model of the afterlife in its own way, I believe.
Well, as above, so below. And also, I've come to believe that this is life on earth is purgatory rather than, it's certainly not heaven,
no.
And it's not entirely hell either. So
no.
I put us in the middle position.
Yes.
Going back to the third party, do you suppose that every after-death communication requires a permission from God or an angel or something like that?
Some people ask God for their loved one to be sent back or to be permitted to come back, and they use that language. But frankly, I don't think a God is necessary. I think the person has to want to and then learn how to and then comes to the person. But we also have to be open, and some people just are not that open. Now, what's interesting is what we are talking about, this whole topic, we wouldn't do if we were in Central South America, parts of Europe, or especially, say, in the Philippines. Why? Because these experiences are so common in those many countries that you have an experience at night with your child, your parent, your brother, sister, whoever it is who died. They come to you, they talk to you, they give you information. You see them, you hear them, all the rest, and then they're gone. And the next day, you share your experience with your friends and family members, openly and easily, publicly. It's no big deal. You can't sell books on this. It's like selling a book on the advantages of driving a car. Duh. Or having an iPhone. You just don't need it.
Bill, have you experienced many stories about people having visits from a deceased pet?
Yes, we didn't put them in the book. We thought the book would be too far out if we included children's accounts or ones where people have pets, but we do have them in our files. The most common, of course, are dogs or cats, but we have one with a bunny rabbit and one with a horse, which died and had to be put down, and came back with a verbal message which transformed her life because of it. Wow. So, yes, pets come back. And I'd love to say that young children, should be believed, but in this country they're not. They say they report the presence of or seeing or talking with a deceased relative or friend or somebody they've known. And they're often told, don't talk about that. What will the neighbors think? Or people think you're crazy or weird. So you must have had a dream. It's not real, blah, blah, blah. So we go around telling our children that their own experiences are not valid.
I knew a four-year-old who said he couldn't wait for his little baby sister to be born because he was forgetting what heaven was like, and he wanted to ask her about it.
I heard the same thing someplace, yes.
What sort of child experiences have you heard?
Well, there are two. One was a boy. These were all teenage boys. One boy had drowned in a swimming pool, and yet this was a boy who was a swimmer, very good swimmer. I don't know that he was a lifeguard, but he could have been that kind of kid. I mean, absolutely water safe. And what had happened? How could he have drowned? Nobody could figure it out. And this other boy, who was still physically alive, reported that his friend came to him and explained that this boy had been running toward the pool and and meant to sort of like jump into it, but he just mistimed his footing a bit, so that he just grazed the back of his head on the side of the pool, and he knocked himself out. And he drowned because he was unconscious for just a short while, but enough to breathe all the water in. But the blow was so slight that even when they did an autopsy, they missed it. It was more of just, just being hit very hard in the back of your head. It didn't abrade the skin or cause any bleeding or anything like that. There were no broken bones, obviously. So he was able to shed light on how the boy, his friend, had drowned. That was one.
Interesting.
And then there are two very long ones. One I won't go into, but there used to be a baseball team called the St. Louis Browns. Not the Cardinals, but the Browns. Many years ago, back in the 50s. And I don't know where they moved, but they did. And this boy's uncle, I think, was on that team. And he used to visit his son repeatedly, and he informed him about all the players on that team. Now, remember, this is a baseball team that no longer existed for when the boy was being visited by his uncle. But he's being told about the names of the players, the positions they played, and who was a good batter and who was a good pitcher, and all the kind of baseball jargon that the boy didn't know anything about. And later on, when he compared it, it indeed was accurate. And finally, a really good story is a boy was visited by his uncle who had been a master carpenter. And even though we didn't put the story in the book, we did the research on it, because he described tools that are no longer made or used that this boy knew about, because his grandfather had described them to him and given them the proper name. But when we called Home Depot, there was nobody old enough to remember this kind of equipment being available. So, I mean, here it's very forward. I mean, it's much further out stuff than the typical adult.
Yeah. Well, listen, Bill, you're going to be giving a lecture at the Orlando IONS conference in July, and also teaching a workshop. Maybe you could tell folks, if they sign up for this workshop, what they'll be seeing and learning.
Okay. My son Chris and I were, for many years, Judy and I, and then were concerned that so many people are bereaved and don't have an experience, and they want one so much. And yes, they go to mediums and other things like that, but I don't care how many experiences you have or how many mediums you see, you're still going to be bereaved very difficult, very hard. But still, it's nice to have these experiences. So what we're attempting to do is teach people how to become more open, sensitive, receptive, and able to have ADCs. And we do this with using guided imagery exercises. And we've done 2 of these courses publicly so far. And people seem to love them. And it's not that people have the experience during the workshop necessarily, some have, but it's really just opening yourself up for the future benefits of being contacted by a loved one who has died.
Wow, that's great. At the end of one of your IONS lectures, you asked the audience, what would the world be like if everyone knew there was life after death? How would you answer that question?
Hopefully be a lot more loving and kind.
Yeah. I think that's the message that it always comes down to. Bill, how can listeners get copies of your book, Hello from Heaven?
Amazon.com has it.
Okay.
Often it only sells for $7.99, $8 or less, and often it's cheaper than that on Amazon. Occasionally you can buy it still at Barnes & Noble, because it's been out 20 years now.
Yeah.
A little over 20.
You can get it on Kindle, too. That's how I have it.
Get it on Kindle. Yes. Yeah.
Bill, I'm sorry to say we're out of time for today. My thanks to you. Thanks to your ex-wife, Judy, for both of your efforts in pioneering research into ADCs and for sharing your discoveries with us today. If you would like, if the listeners would like to listen to this show again or any other of our previous programs, please visit our nderadio.org website. And for more information about IONS and the upcoming conference in July in Orlando, Florida, where Bill will be conducting his workshop, please visit that website at iands.org. This is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.